I've got a question here from Theodore Dubois. He wants to know, how hard is it to make a kilt in a plain fabric, such as saffron?
How hard is it to make
From a technical
kilt?
standpoint? Yeah, you guys know.
Yeah, it depends on the solid fabric. Is that saffron or is that tweed? If it's herringbone tweed, that adds another twist to it. From a technical standpoint, if you're doing something in a solid, well, let me start the other direction. When you're making a tartan kilt, you have a distinct advantage to most articles of clothing is that you don't need a pattern. You have a grid right in front of you, right on the cloth, and you're actually pleating things to the set or to the stripe based on the grid. So you're doing everything based on the pattern that is on the fabric. If you're making a solid color kilt, you can still do it, but you have to create the grid. You have to do something so you know how far down you're going to sew the fell. You're going to need to know, where are you going to iron the pleats in. So you have to almost mark up solid color cloth to figure out exactly how you're going to make it and where you're going to sew and what you're going to sew to, what lines you're going to sew to. So solid color kilts, the reason why most companies charge a bit more, frankly speaking, for a solid color kilt or for a tweed kilt is because there's more work involved because you're doing things in a different way. So when we make a tweed kilt or solid color kilt, the first thing we do is, cut it to length, and then we chalk out where the pleats are going to be. And then the next step before we sew anything is ironing in the pleats. So we actually iron in each pleat individually so that now we can just essentially stack them up and then chalk where the bottom of the fell is, where the top of the fell is, and how you're going to sew it together. You also have, generally speaking, with a lot of solid color cloth, a hem to worry about. Ian, before we get to tweeds, anything for solid colors that I'm thinking of that it's just a bunch of extra marking or chalking of the cloth that you would think about?
That would be the main thing, because if you were just going to try to go at it kind of blind, sure, you might say it's kind of forgiving, it's solid. Who notices if it's a little crooked? But then the kilt will kind of not sit on your body right. It'll have weird waves to it. The pleats might not dangle in quite the right way. So yeah, you got to do it's like a drafting project. Yeah. And I would say it takes longer as a rule. I wouldn't say it's harder. I'm not as comfortable with it because we don't do it as often. Yeah. But if it was like 50-50 tartan versus solids, I'd say it's probably a little easier, but probably does take a little bit longer.
Yeah. And you're doing things out of order. Yeah. So as a kilt maker, you're not reinventing the wheel, but it takes more thought and more concentration because it's not the same thing you always do.
Partially just because we don't do it very often. I'm sure if we did it very often, it wouldn't feel so. But yeah, you got to stop and pause. Like, okay, normally go to this step, but oh crap, I can't do that. I gotta pause and think about. So you have to kind of rethink your whole process every time a little bit. Yep.
And if you're doing a herringbone tweed, or even really a window pane tweed, depending on how vertical and horizontal stripes are on it, you have to worry about the direction that the stripes go or that the herringbone pattern goes. So when you're weaving cloth, you have the long section is the warp, and the stuff that goes vertical, the shorter direction is the weft. In most industries, when you cut out a pattern as a tailor, you're cutting it out sideways on the cloth, so you're going down the warp. In a kilt, you're not. You're going the other direction. So the long way is the long way, and you're cutting it 90 degrees from essentially every other industry. The problem is the herringbone pattern, the little V's that you have on a herringbone. If you think of like a pinstripe suit that has herringbone pattern, they don't run this way on the cloth. They actually run that way. So if you make the kilt normal, so you're using the bottom edge for the bottom edge of the kilt, then you have the horizontal stripes or the herringbone pattern goes across the kilt, not vertical on the kilt. So how you get around that when you're dealing with a tweed fabric that has a herringbone pattern is you actually take the kilt or take the fabric and you cut it into chunks, and then turn them 90 degrees, splice them together, and then hem the entire bottom. So it is a lot more involved in the process of making a solid color kilt or a tweed kilt with a herringbone pattern. Any thoughts on that?
And even some solid color materials in worsted wool that don't have a herringbone, that don't have a window pane, are also made without the type of tuck selvage you want to see on a kilt because they don't expect folks to use it for a kilt. So sometimes you still have to have a hem, even if you are doing it more or less otherwise the traditional way.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of things that the end user doesn't, or the end wearer doesn't think about that goes into the process of making a kilt. So it's one of the things that's it's fun and challenging at the same time. Yes, indeed. All right.
I have one question.
Sure.
I'm curious to know in the comments who out there would consider wearing a solid color kilt and why. I've had it in my head lately that I think it'd be cool to see a few more Irish guys wearing blue kilts because that was the original color for St. Patrick. And it's kind of a lost piece of the culture in a sense, the nationalist movement at least. I think it'd be interesting to know if you were going to wear a solid color kilt, what color would you choose, and would it just be your favorite color, or would it be for a reason, like a symbolic reason? Just curious.
Ian.
We're working with a pipe band in Ireland who is doing exactly that. They're getting blue
Get out of
kilts.
town.
And initially we explored doing a custom run to like hit the exact Pantone shade of like St. Patrick's blue. Now we ended up going with a bit of a stock color option, but yeah, that's a thing.
Can you get me in touch with them?
Yeah, definitely.
That is so freaking cool.
They should be receiving their kilts next week.
I had no
Their first
clue
batch
that was
from
that.
us.
Ian, you should tell me these things.
Also,
There's a story there. That's awesome.
also maybe we should have had Mac
Props to
on the
them.
show today, because didn't Mac wear a solid black kilt for his wedding?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've worn them too. But
Yeah. And not a utility style kilt to the.
Yeah.
oh,
the
Ian, that
question.
does my
his
heart
a-
good.
Was his a shadow tartan? Do you
I
remember?
don't
I think
think
it might
so.
have.
I think
Well,
it
maybe
was
it was
solid
solid.
black.
Mine was shadow.
I could be mistaken though.
Okay.
If only.
If only we could ask
If only
him.
he was in the
Yes.
building.
If only he weren't gone. Bless him.
It's
He's
this.
gone from the building. He's not there today. So, as Eric asked during this video, let me know in the comments. Would you ever wear a solid kilt? If so, would it be tweed or just a solid color wool? And what color would it be? And why?